Ragnar Lothbrok is the quintessential Viking hero, a semi-legendary king from Denmark whose name echoed across the North Sea. He represents the very beginning of the Viking Age, a time when Norse warlords first began to look outward for plunder and glory. The rising tension of his era was the growing ambition of Scandinavian chieftains, who saw the wealthy, poorly defended kingdoms of England and Francia as ripe for the taking. Driven by a thirst for fame that would outlive him, Ragnar sought to lead raids that were bigger, bolder, and more profitable than any before. In 845, he led a massive fleet of over 100 longships up the river Seine. This audacious decision to strike at the heart of the Frankish kingdom, Paris itself, transformed him from a simple raider into a major European threat. His most legendary act was the successful siege and sacking of Paris, a feat that terrified the continent. The peak of his career was not just the plunder, but forcing the West Frankish king, Charles the Bald, to pay him a fortune in silver to leave, a humiliating tribute known as Danegeld. According to the sagas, his final raid on England ended in disaster when his ships wrecked on the coast of Northumbria. He was captured by his great rival, King Ella, who sought to make an example of the infamous Viking leader. Ragnar's life met a famously brutal end, a conclusion that would echo for generations. The final act of his story, as legend tells it, was his execution by being thrown into a pit of venomous snakes, where he died defiant. His story was not recorded by contemporary chroniclers, but was forged and embellished in the great Icelandic sagas centuries later. These epic poems transformed him from a historical warlord into a foundational myth, the heroic father of a dynasty of conquerors. In the end, the historical man is lost, completely replaced by the legend he inspired. His name became the bloody blueprint for the Viking Age, a story whose brutal ending was just the beginning for his sons. Ivar the Boneless was a son of Ragnar Lothbrok and the brilliant, ruthless commander of the great heathen army. He arrived in Anglo-Saxon England in 865, not merely for plunder, but for conquest, revenge, and settlement. The driving force behind his actions was the execution of his father, Ragnar, by King Ælla of Northumbria. This act of vengeance was the unifying ambition that brought together one of the largest Viking forces ever assembled, an army intent on subjugating all of England. After conquering the Northumbrian capital of York, Ivar and his brothers captured King Ælla. They subjected him to the Blood Eagle, a gruesome ritual execution, an irreversible act of vengeance that cemented Ivar's terrifying reputation. Ivar's most significant achievement was the systematic destruction of the Anglo-Saxon kingdoms of Northumbria, Mercia, and East Anglia. His campaign peaked with the killing of Edmund the Martyr, the King of East Anglia, an event that left only one English kingdom, Wessex, standing against the Viking tide. The immediate consequence of his victories was the establishment of the Danelaw, a vast territory in England under Viking control. His army overwintered, built fortifications, and transformed from a raiding party into an occupying force, fundamentally changing the course of English history. The end of his story in England is a mystery, as he disappears from the English chronicles after his great victories. Irish annals suggest a final chapter for Ivar as a powerful king of the Norse in Dublin, where he reportedly died peacefully years later. His historical reputation was shaped almost entirely by the accounts of his victims, the English monks who wrote the Anglo-Saxon Chronicle. They portrayed him as a pagan demon, a figure of pure cruelty and cunning, a narrative that has defined him as the ultimate Viking villain. The central paradox of Ivar is that of a man known for a physical ailment, yet remembered only for his immense and terrible strength. His brutal campaign of revenge did more than destroy kingdoms. It forged the foundations of a new one. Björn Ironside, another legendary son of Ragnar Lothbrok, was a masterful sea king and one of the great adventurers of the Viking Age. While his brothers focused on England, Björn's arena was the wider world, leading ambitious expeditions far beyond the familiar waters of the North Sea. The underlying force driving him was the desire to surpass the fame of his father by leading a raid of unprecedented scale and distance. He assembled a massive fleet with his partner, the Viking chieftain Halfdan, with the ambitious goal of sacking the greatest city in the world, Rome. In 859, he and his fleet sailed through the Strait of Gibraltar, leaving the known world behind. This daring passage into the Mediterranean was a point of no return, as they began a multi-year campaign of plunder across Christian and Muslim lands in Spain, France, and Italy. The event that defined him was the culmination of this great raid, the sacking of the Italian city of Luna. Believing Luna to be Rome, the Vikings feigned a conversion to Christianity to gain entry, then slaughtered the inhabitants and burned the city to the ground. The journey home proved as dangerous as the raid itself, as his fleet was battered by storms and attacked by a Muslim Andalusian fleet near Spain. He returned to Francia with immense wealth but only a fraction of his original fleet, the high cost of his legendary ambition. The end of his raiding career, according to the sagas, saw him return to Scandinavia a fabulously wealthy man. The final resolution for Björn was to rule as a powerful king in Sweden, founding the Munso dynasty that would last for generations. His story was preserved and shaped by the saga of Ragnar Lothbrok and his sons, which celebrated his cunning and adventurous spirit. This narrative tradition framed him as the ideal sea king, a man whose fame was won not just through brute force, but through cleverness and a willingness to venture into the unknown. The ultimate irony of Björn's life is that his greatest failure, mistaking Luna for Rome, became his most famous victory. His Mediterranean Odyssey stands as a testament to the sheer reach and ambition of the Viking Age, a journey into the heart of ancient empires. Erik the Red was a notoriously violent Norseman from Norway, a colonizer and explorer who founded the first European settlement in Greenland. His story is set in the late 10th century, a period of westward expansion for the Vikings, pushing from Iceland into the even more remote lands of the North Atlantic. The driving force in his life was a violent temper that made it impossible for him to live peacefully within society. After his father was exiled from Norway for manslaughter, Erik repeated the pattern in Iceland, killing several men in various feuds over property and honor. The Icelandic Assembly, the Althing, declared him an outlaw and sentenced him to 3 years of exile. This judgment forced him to sail west into uncharted waters in search of a new land where he could make his own rules. His greatest feat was the successful 3-year exploration of a massive, empty island he found across the sea. He cleverly marketed the new territory as Greenland to attract settlers, a masterful piece of propaganda that became the apex of his life's work. He successfully led a large expedition of colonists back to Greenland, establishing a thriving Norse settlement that would last for nearly 500 years. The immediate consequence was the creation of a new, independent Norse society with Erik as its paramount chieftain, a king in all but name. He remained the powerful leader of his new world, fiercely clinging to the old pagan gods even as his own wife and children converted to Christianity. An epidemic that swept through the colony took Erik with it, a final end just as his son Leif was making his own famous voyages. His story was immortalized in the Saga of the Greenlanders and Erik the Red's saga. These accounts, while celebrating his achievements as a founder, did not shy away from his violent past, shaping his legacy as that of a difficult but visionary patriarch. Erik the Red was a man whose antisocial rage led directly to the creation of a new world. His settlement in Greenland stands as a monument to Viking tenacity, a society built on the edge of the world by a man who couldn't live anywhere else. Harald Sigurdsson, known to history as Hardrada or Hard Ruler, was a Norwegian king and the man often called the last great Viking. He was a towering figure whose life of violence and ambition spanned the entire known world, from the frozen north to the golden heart of the Byzantine Empire. A relentless ambition for power, born from the trauma of his youth, defined his life. As a teenager, he fought and lost alongside his half-brother King Olaf of Norway at the Battle of Stiklestad, a defeat that left him wounded and exiled. He fled to Constantinople, the capital of the Byzantine Empire, and joined its elite mercenary unit, the Varangian Guard. There he spent over a decade honing his skills as a warrior and commander, fighting across the Mediterranean and amassing a colossal fortune. The feat that would echo through history was his triumphant and violent return to Norway, where he used his immense wealth and military experience to reclaim his family's throne. His long and brutal reign as king, where he ruthlessly crushed his domestic enemies, was the peak of his career, earning him the title of Hard Ruler. In 1066, following the death of the English king, he saw one last opportunity for legendary glory and launched a massive invasion of England. His initial success was met by the army of the English king Harold Godwinson, leading to a fateful confrontation at a place called Stamford Bridge. The Viking army was caught by surprise, and according to the sagas, Hardrada fought like a berserker in the front lines without his armor. An arrow struck him in the throat, killing him on the field and shattering his invading army, a final bloody end to his life of battle. His story was famously chronicled by the Icelandic historian Snorri Sturluson, who portrayed him as the ultimate Viking adventurer king. This historical interpretation shaped his legacy as the grand final hero of the Norse sagas, a man whose death marked the end of an era. For all his worldly success, from amassing Byzantine gold to ruling Norway, his final ambition led him to an unmarked grave on an English battlefield. His death in England is the historical landmark that traditionally signals the close of 3 centuries of Viking terror and exploration. Egill Skallagrímsson was a 10th century Icelandic chieftain, a figure who embodied the contradictions of the Viking Age, a brilliant poet and a savage killer. He lived in the turbulent world of the Icelandic Commonwealth, a society governed by complex laws, but where blood feuds were a way of life. A fierce and unpredictable temper, a trait inherited from his famously ugly and difficult family, created a constant tension in his life. His violent nature was present from his earliest years. As a child, he committed his first killing with an axe during a game that had turned sour. He made a powerful enemy in King Erik Bloodaxe of Norway, a lifelong feud that would define his story. This conflict began after a series of insults and violent encounters, forcing Egill to flee Norway under a death sentence. His most famous deed was his unique form of vengeance against King Erik. Before leaving Norway, he performed a shamanistic ritual, erecting a cursing pole to drive the spirits of the land against the king and queen, a psychological peak to his defiance. Throughout his life, he alternated between composing masterful poetry and engaging in brutal acts of violence, often going into a berserker-like rage. The consequence of this dual nature was a life of constant conflict, as his sharp tongue and quickness to violence earned him enemies across the Viking world. He survived to old age in Iceland, a rare feat for a man with so many enemies, eventually growing blind and frail. His violent life found a quiet resolution as he died peacefully, having outlived all his rivals and buried his silver hoard in a secret location. His life story was preserved in Egill's Saga, one of the most famous Icelandic sagas, likely written by the historian Snorri Sturluson. This literary masterpiece framed him as a complex anti-hero, exploring the tension between his poetic genius and his monstrous brutality. The great puzzle of Egill is the man who could craft beautiful, soul-bearing poetry, yet kill a man with his bare teeth in a fit of rage. He represents the untamable spirit of the Viking Age, a figure as skilled with his words as he was with his axe. Freydís Eiríksdóttir was the daughter of Erik the Red, a Norse woman who sailed to the New World of Vinland and proved to be as ruthless and violent as her famous father. Her story unfolds on the fragile edge of the Viking world in the short-lived and conflict-ridden settlements of North America. The underlying tension of the Vinland colony was a mix of greed and paranoia as the Norse explorers constantly battled with the native inhabitants and each other over resources. Freydís, ambitious and hungry for wealth, entered into a partnership with two other Icelandic explorers for a joint expedition, an alliance that was doomed from the start. One saga tells of a moment when the native people, the Skrælings, attacked the Norse camp, causing the Viking men to panic and flee. The heavily pregnant Freydís grabbed a sword, beat her bare chest with the flat of the blade, and let out a terrifying war cry that single-handedly routed the attackers. Her most infamous moment, however, was born not of bravery but of pure treachery against her own people. She falsely accused her partners of treachery, had her husband and his men kill all the men in their party, and then personally took up an axe and slaughtered the 5 women herself. She returned to Greenland with a ship full of timber and a story of her partner's deaths, threatening to kill anyone who spoke the truth. The consequences of her actions were a dark cloud of suspicion that hung over her, as rumors of the massacre eventually reached her famous brother, Leif Eriksson. Leif investigated the rumors and learned the horrifying truth of what she had done in Vinland. While Leif could not bring himself to execute his own sister, he cursed her and her descendants, leaving her to live as a social outcast in Greenland. Her brutal story was recorded in 2 different Icelandic sagas, each offering a slightly different version of events. These sagas, our only source for her life, shaped her legacy as either a valiant shield maiden or a treacherous murderer, a complex and terrifying figure of the Vinland expeditions. In a world dominated by the stories of men, Freydís's tale survives as a testament to female ferocity, both heroic and monstrous. She remains a dark and powerful presence in the sagas, a reminder that the Viking thirst for wealth and glory was not limited by gender. Leif Eriksson, son of Erik the Red, is celebrated as one of history's greatest explorers, the first European to set foot in North America. But in the world of the Vikings, even a peaceful explorer had to be a formidable warrior, capable of defending his life and his discoveries. The underlying tension of his voyages was the immense risk of sailing into the complete unknown, far from the safety of any Norse settlement. His ambition was to succeed where others had failed, to find and explore the forested lands west of Greenland that had only been glimpsed by earlier sailors. Around the year 1000, he and his crew made landfall on the continent of North America, a place they would call Vinland. This momentous discovery was a point of no return, opening a new chapter in Viking exploration, one that would inevitably lead to conflict. While his expedition was largely peaceful, the sagas make it clear that a warrior's mindset was essential for survival. The peak of the Viking presence in Vinland was not one of conquest, but a series of tense encounters and violent skirmishes with the native population that would ultimately doom the settlements. The immediate consequence of these clashes was the realization that this new world, unlike Iceland or Greenland, was already inhabited by a numerous and hostile people. The Norse, skilled as they were in warfare, were simply too few and too far from home to sustain a permanent colony in the face of this resistance. The great discovery led to several more expeditions by his family, including his ruthless sister Freydís, but none could establish a lasting foothold. The final resolution was the eventual abandonment of the Vinland settlements, a quiet and gradual retreat from the shores of North America. The story of his discovery was preserved for centuries only in the Vinland sagas, which were viewed by many as mere folklore or myth. His reputation as a historical figure was only fully cemented in the 1960s, when the archaeological discovery of a Norse settlement in Newfoundland provided physical proof that his voyages were real. Leif Eriksson's story is one of a discovery so profound, it was forgotten by the world for nearly 1,000 years. The ruins of his camp in North America are a quiet monument to the furthest reach of the Viking Age, a whisper of a lost world. Rollo was a powerful Viking chieftain and an unstoppable raider who became the founder and first ruler of Normandy in France. His story represents a crucial transition in the Viking Age, from plundering and raiding to permanent settlement and political integration with Europe. The underlying pressure of his time was the relentless Viking assault on the Kingdom of West Francia, which was rich but politically fractured. Rollo, a towering and ferocious warrior, distinguished himself as one of the most persistent and dangerous leaders of the Vikings who terrorized the lands along the Seine. After years of raiding, he took part in the massive Viking siege of Paris, an event that demonstrated the severe threat he posed to the French crown. His refusal to leave the lands around the Seine proved to the Frankish king that he could not be defeated, only bargained with. The event that defined him was not a battle, but a treaty. The peak of his career came in the year 911, when King Charles the Simple offered Rollo a vast territory of land in exchange for peace and protection from other Viking raiders. The consequence of this agreement was the creation of a new powerful state, the Duchy of Normandy, with Rollo as its first duke. He and his men converted to Christianity and adopted the French language and customs, integrating themselves into the fabric of the kingdom. He proved to be as skilled a ruler as he was a raider, defending his new lands with the same ferocity he once used to attack them. The final resolution of his story was the establishment of a powerful and stable dynasty that would go on to have a profound impact on European history. His legacy was shaped not by Viking sagas, but by the chronicles of Norman historians, most notably Dudo of Saint-Quentin. These accounts portrayed him as a noble founder and a pious convert, solidifying his image as the heroic patriarch of the Norman people. Rollo is the ultimate example of the Viking who came to conquer but stayed to build. His descendant, William the Conqueror, would launch the Norman invasion of England in 1066, a world-changing event born from the ambition of a single, relentless Viking. Gunnar Hámundarson was one of the greatest heroes of the Icelandic sagas, a man celebrated for his unmatched skill in combat. He lived in the 10th century Iceland, a world where personal honor was paramount and deadly feuds could erupt from the smallest insult. The underlying tension of his life was the contrast between his own peaceful nature and the violent, honor-obsessed society he inhabited. He was a man who hated to kill, yet his extraordinary martial prowess and the constant provocations of his enemies drew him into one blood feud after another. He embarked on a successful raiding career abroad, a common practice for young Icelandic men to gain wealth and fame. His return to Iceland as a celebrated warrior made him a prominent target in the complex web of local family politics. The events that defined him were his many victories in single combat, where he was said to be able to fight with a sword in each hand. His reputation as an invincible warrior, a man who could leap his own height in full armor and whose skill with his unique halberd was unmatched, was the peak of his story. The consequences of his many victories were a growing list of resentful enemies, all bound by the laws of the feud to seek revenge against him. After one killing too many, he was sentenced by the Althing to 3 years of exile, a punishment intended to cool the tensions. As he was leaving for exile, he looked back at his beautiful farm and in a moment of weakness refused to leave, famously stating, "Fair as the hillside, I will not ride away." This decision led to his legendary last stand, where he was betrayed, surrounded, and killed in his own longhouse, fighting his enemies to the very end. His tragic story is the centerpiece of Njal's saga, arguably the greatest of all the Icelandic sagas. This literary masterpiece immortalized him as the perfect but flawed hero, a man whose loyalty to his home became his fatal weakness. Was Gunnar a hero defeated by his enemies, or a man defeated by his own love for his home? The question is what makes him the quintessential saga hero, a figure whose legend is a powerful exploration of honor, fate, and the bonds of land. Sigurd Snake in the Eye was another of Ragnar Lothbrok's formidable sons, a Danish king and a key commander in the Great Heathen Army. He was born, according to legend, with a mark in his eye resembling a snake biting its own tail, the Ouroboros, a symbol that foretold his destiny. Like his brothers, the driving force of his life was the need to avenge his father's death and to carve out a kingdom for himself. The underlying pressure was to live up to the fearsome reputation of his family, particularly his cunning older brother, Ivar the Boneless. He accompanied the Great Heathen Army in its invasion of England, fighting alongside his brothers in their campaign of conquest. He eventually took command of his own faction of the army, beginning to lead his own campaigns and forge his own path. The acts that became his legend were his brutal and effective military campaigns, which helped to shatter the Anglo-Saxon kingdoms. His role in the conquest of Northumbria and Mercia secured the Danelaw and established him as a powerful Viking king in his own right. After years of war in England, he turned his attention back to his homeland in Denmark. The consequences of this shift were years of consolidation, as he used the wealth from his raids to secure his power base. Unlike many of his contemporaries, he did not die in a foreign land. He eventually inherited the Danish throne, ruling as a powerful king over Zealand, Scania, and the other Danish islands. His story was primarily shaped by the Danish historian Saxo Grammaticus in his work, the Gesta Danorum. This nationalistic chronicle portrayed Sigurd as a noble and heroic Danish king, a worthy successor to his legendary father, downplaying the brutality of his raids. The ultimate irony is that for a man born with such a famously unique mark, his story is often overshadowed by his more famous brothers. He represents the dynastic success of the Lothbrok family, a warrior whose strange birthmark became the symbol of a royal line that ruled for generations. Halfdan Ragnarsson was a son of Ragnar Lothbrok, and one of the most important leaders of the Great Heathen Army during its conquest of England. He was a pragmatic and ruthless commander who represents the Viking transition from raiding for portable wealth to seizing land itself. The underlying tension for Halfdan and the other commanders was the need to keep their massive army paid, fed, and motivated during a years-long campaign. His primary ambition was not just to avenge his father, but to secure a permanent homeland for his warriors in the rich and fertile lands of Anglo-Saxon England. After years of fighting, he led his portion of the army back to Northumbria, the kingdom where his father had been killed. In the year 876, he divided the lands of the kingdom among his warriors, a pivotal moment where Vikings began to settle down, plow the land, and become farmers. The event that defined him is the permanent settlement of Northumbria, which effectively created the northern heartland of the Danelaw. He became the first Viking king of Northumbria, a transformation from a mobile sea king into a landed ruler. His success in England, however, was not enough. Like many Viking leaders, his ambition was restless. This ambition led him to Ireland, where he attempted to press a claim to the throne of the Norse kingdom of Dublin. This final campaign would prove to be his undoing, as he entered a bloody power struggle with other Viking factions already established in Ireland. At the Battle of Strangford Lough in year 877, Halfdan was killed in combat, a violent end for a man who had conquered a kingdom. His historical reputation was recorded with grudging respect by his enemies in the Anglo-Saxon Chronicle. The monks who wrote the history remembered him not as a simple brute, but as a king who divided land and established a kingdom, a pragmatic act that forever changed their world. Halfdan came to England for revenge, but his true impact was in creation, not destruction. His settlement laid the foundations for the great Viking city of Jorvik, modern-day York, a permanent Norse footprint on the soul of England. From the legendary fury of founding fathers to the calculating ambition of the kings who followed, the story of the Vikings is one of brutal transformation. If you enjoyed the video, don't forget to like, subscribe, and comment with your ideas for future topics. Thanks again for watching.